And then also you have to talk about the global economic system, where you have the ayatollahs of the economic system, that is the IMF, the WTO, and the World Bank, which basically serve the interests of transnational corporations, and introducing structural reforms and basically trying to integrate the South into a neoliberal economic framework, to the detriment of sustainable development within those nations. And coming from India, and having spent more than half my life in India, I speak from a personal perspective to here, as a racialized other, as someone who has grown up in a community, in a country, in a city with 50% Muslim population. So for me, the personal at that level, when I'm talking about it in pedagogical terms, does become political to an extent. But without really, because I cannot really prevent myself from being marked in certain ways, because obviously if I'm being critical about certain things in America, then there's a history to that I have come from outside, and there's a historical context there, and it is important for students to kind of step away from that ahistorical way of knowing or not knowing about things that go around them. And also during the course, I introduced them to perception management, techniques of perception management, where spin doctors come into play, where spin doctors basically, they are the impression that they have to correct the media imbalance. So the spin doctors come into play. So perception management has become a very, very key strategy, especially post 9/11. And also looking at how information warfare launched by the military itself has become such a key part of the media framework, where given the plethora of generals that dominate the news media, it has become general news now, especially in the context of war, where you have the former generals and colonels coming and talking in very, very loving terms about all the gadgetry they have at their disposal to destroy other people. And the basic thing, of course, is that most students, in fact all students to a certain extent, have no idea about the kind of damage that wars inflict on innocent civilian population because of this kind of information warfare. Minimal collateral damage, smart bombs, as if there is no death, minimalization of casualties, that it's a virtuous war, we only kill the bad people. But when you start documenting how many hundreds of thousands of people have died in Iraq and Afghanistan, then it comes as a shocker to some of the students here. And of course, the last thing would be in terms of how the US projects itself through is public diplomacy, about how they basically talk. I mean, they do it through instruments such as Voice of America, or setting up television stations which basically voice American propaganda, or through cultural exchanges and educational exchanges. So public diplomacy also becomes a very, very key part. And in fact, if you remember, Karen Hughes was appointed by George W. Bush as this kind of a public diplomat, for her to go around the world and talk, present a very, very positive image about America. And then in another sense, in terms of what it means to talk about representations of war and the role of journalists, so what has happened over time is that civic journalism has gone out of the window. Journalism no longer exists in America to serve the interests of the people, the public, but in fact, journalism has acquired a kind of a partisan and patriotic fervor. So there is absolutely no objectivity, and I'm not saying that one should always put objectivity in quotes here, where there are two ways of looking at it: a journalism of attachment or a journalism of detachment. Sometimes journalists do get caught up in war zones, and it does affect their reporting. And sometimes when they practice the philosophy of detachment, they completely miss out on the historical context itself. And that is a huge issue there. So the students basically get to know through the course of the semester how the media, the mainstream media, reproduce the dominant frameworks of the military-industrial complex, and the media being part of that industrial complex here. And as part of my pedagogical exercise, I have them do journal critiques where they just don't rely on the textbooks as such, which of course is part of the course, but also do journal critiques of, basically get familiar with contemporary research, media research, what is really going on now, how are people approaching issues right now, which is very, very important, and showing them documentaries. And this is where I bring in the alternative perspectives, showing them documentaries like, say, Control Room. When I was teaching a media and politics course, I showed Control Room. I don't know how many of you watched Control Room, made by this Egyptian woman, on how the Arab world views the same war. And here you have a fundamentally divergent dichotomy here, in the sense of how America views the war and how the Arab world views the war. So I map Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya and other media sources so that they get to know what others think about America. I also have them do blogs. I mean, in the sense, read blogs, both from the neocon perspective and from a lefty perspective, to see how they basically have a conversation between each other. And of course, the main thing for me, without really browbeating them, is to get them to civically engage. What does it mean to be a citizen? What does it mean to practice citizenship? And that is very, very important, because how does one get rid of that apathy and not just kind of sit back and be immune to the casualties of the war itself, and kind of just keep turning the pages and forget about what is going on and get caught up in your soap opera. So anyway, I just wanted to set it up in terms of how I approach it.